I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports in San Antonio, Texas. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News in Philadelphia, coming to wrap up UTSA's big win over Temple. Greg, we see a lot of offense today. You were there. Just what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start with Frank Harris, obviously,
Right.
right? It was an interesting really performance for him because first couple throws of the game looked kind of shaky, to be honest.
Little bit, yeah.
He the first pass was an out route to the right that came up short on third down, and it just didn't look like it was exactly where it needed to be. Then he had McEwen down the right sideline and kind of underthrew him. That
Missed
should have
him.
been a long touchdown. And then I think it was either that drive or the next one that he had an out pass to the left and he
Just
missed
sailed
it by
it.
a
Yeah.
mile. And I
Yep.
was like, oh no, like this is not going to work. And then from that point on, it was like he was near perfect. I know there was one throw he missed at the end of the game that he was beating himself up on, like a really short pass that he just spiked into the ground. But other than that, it was like just perfect placement on a lot of these. I mean, the touchdown to Tyke couldn't have been any better. The 40-yarder down the middle and the one to McEwen on the slant and go route just couldn't have been any better. He finishes with 338 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he goes 25 of 33. So, I mean, he was hitting on all cylinders as a passer. And, you could tell because of the turf toe and coming back and perhaps being a little bit limited mobility wise, he moved around well, but they didn't call any kind of designed run for him. And I think typically, even when he's right early in the season, they're going to lean away from that some and then like not wanting to take that pounding early and then maybe go to it more later in the year. But he looked as mobile as he needed to be, kind of buying some extra time to get open throws. And there was one play where he scrambled for about 10 yards and then that set up his little quarterback sneak touchdown. So I don't know. What did you make of the offense overall?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the offense. It seemed like it was a little bit different. I don't know that um maybe some of the play calling was a little bit different because of Frank's them trying to protect Frank from running the ball so much, but we saw a new starting offensive line combination. I think they played pretty well for the most part, had a pretty good run game production, and I mean, I don't know that outside of that kind of slow first quarter that I had any complaints with the offense today.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that for how bad Temple's run defense was, this was a well above average performance for them. So
Yeah.
I don't want to give those guys too much credit in terms of getting the ground game going, but they had it when they needed it. I mean,
Yes.
Robert Henry continues to look really, really good, and it wasn't surprising that he's starting to get more and more of a share of the offense. He had a 43-yard touchdown here that was pretty impressive, and another one right up the middle as well. And I think that part of the game is going to be there when they need it. It's been the passing that's been more the question. And if Frank's going to play like he did today, that's great. We talked about how Justin Burke went up to the press box and was
Yep.
calling them up there. And you never really know how much of a difference that makes in a vacuum. You're just picking out from a bunch of different factors. Like maybe their game plan just dictated that things were going to look one way, or maybe what the defense was doing just sort of pushed them in one direction or another. But can't argue with scoring 49 points. So whether it's just Frank being back and being in top form, apparently, or if it's something with the way it was called or whatever the case may be, it all kind of came together for this outburst that we saw.
That looked a little bit like the UTSA offense of the last two seasons. So there is some promise there. Let's jump to the other side of the ball where obviously there's a little bit of concern coming out of this game. The Roadrunners give up over 500 yards of offense. They did pretty well against the run. It seemed like Temple kind of abandoned the run after starting strong. But what did you make of the defensive performance? I guess you have to mention the two turnovers because they were pretty huge in this game.
Yeah, it's so funny how it played out because the first drive of the game, Temple marches all the way down the field. They score the first touchdown. UTSA goes three and out, and then I think Temple they converted a first down, and then they hand off, and the guy runs right, and he's got about 10 yards. And right at that moment, I'm like, is this team gonna lose every game? Like, do they have any hope? And then
Right.
Dewan punches the ball out right exactly when it was like the lowest point where if they kind of just get a couple more first downs and punch that one in, who knows how the game goes. But it seemed to spark something both for the offense that went down
Yep.
and scored three straight touchdown drives. And
It's funny how that happens, right? Like it's not a coincidence. I don't think that sparked the
right,
offense.
right. It was a very important moment where it felt like things were starting to, I mean, it was too early to say it was like spiraling out of control,
Yeah.
but certainly the game was heading in a direction that was going to be hard to recover. And right then when they needed it, he came up with that play. And it wasn't that long after that they had the one that looked like a pick six that I really
Yeah.
thought that it was, if not for that passing or the roughing the passer, which, certainly that's just by the letter of the rules. It was the penalty, but it had nothing to do with the outcome of the play. You know what I mean? It was like they earned that pick six in a lot of different ways. And um, Yeah, unfortunate that got called back from their perspective, but certainly the turnovers were huge in this game because I think UTSA scored touchdowns off both of those, and just generally it's something they'd been missing. We talked about how they were the only team in the country essentially that hadn't forced a turnover on defense because there was three teams with one, but UTSA's came on special teams when it was like a
Yeah,
punt that got muffed. So it was something that they hadn't done, and it was sort of out of character, and there wasn't really a great explanation for it. It wasn't like there were certain elements of the game that they weren't doing that weren't generating that. It was just something that hadn't come for them, and obviously could be a pivotal factor in a game. So the fact that they were able to get that, I think, is huge. It changes a lot for them, and it changed a lot in this game.
yeah. Let's talk about the pass defense. Obviously, Temple quarterback threw 65 passes, 5 touchdowns, big time performance, and it just seemed like the Roadrunners just had trouble covering those guys today. And you want to give credit. Cam Alexander came up with the game ending pass breakup on 4th down in the end zone, and they did have that pick six that was called back. So at the same time, they give up a lot of yards there, Greg, and that's got to be an error. If there's one huge area of concern coming out of this game, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think the defense, we did our kind of post non-conference play video a
Yeah,
week or two ago, and I think I probably was kind of defending the defense in a lot of
right.
ways.
Yeah,
The pun not intended there, but it seemed like because they had played well in the first two games, and then Army was such a weird situation, and then Tennessee is so much more talented that there was ways to say maybe this is a much better defense than we've seen in recent years. And there were a lot of things today that were kind of alarming. I mean, the first touchdown, it looked like somebody told DeJuan Griffin the play, and he just didn't make the play on the ball, and the Temple was able to score there. And there were plenty of times that I think to me, it's the ones who stood out in a negative way. A lot of times it was like the inside linebackers and I think the safeties in some cases too, just not
bad
tracking,
angles.
yeah, and like not
Yeah,
tracking the ball carriers and not making plays. And people have been critical of the tackling, and I was like, I don't think it's that bad. But today I felt like it was that bad in a lot of different cases. Maybe not start to finish. I'd have to like go back and look at it again. But that was my first impression. Was I was seeing a lot of plays where it felt like guys should make stops. And I think the way Temple plays offense puts a lot of stress on those
yeah,
inside linebackers and safety players too, because Nick Fortune was talking to us about it during the week. He mentioned that they come out with a lot of these condensed sets, and then it's all these different kind of mesh routes and pick plays and things like that,
yeah,
where you either have to be able to track your guy through traffic or handle the exchange, or
right,
maybe you're playing a zone or something like that where it doesn't matter. But generally, it felt like UTSA was just constantly chasing, and especially those first couple of drives, it was like Temple could just throw these flat patterns and get however many yards they needed to convert first downs, or if they were playing these just sort of shallow curl routes, it's not the end of the world to give up 6 or 7 yards, but you
right,
can't give up 6 or 7 yards every play. That's how they just go
right.
right to the field. So it was at a certain point they were either going to have to find the explosive plays with the takeaways, which they did in some cases, or they were just going to have to tighten it up in other cases, which they did as well. And of course, Temple converting 7 of their first 8 third downs makes it look a lot worse too. But at a certain point, whether it's that situation or like we talked about with Army, maybe it's unlucky that you can't string a couple plays together, but also you got to do it. You got to get off the
Yeah,
field. You know?
yeah. I think so. They started 7 of 8 on 3rd downs. I think they ended 12 of 20, or
I
so.
read that. I read
Yeah,
that in your story, so I'll take
yeah,
your word for it.
yeah. So I mean, it was a weird game in that sense that Temple started fast, and then UTSA did something at a halftime to shut them down. It looked like these guys were going to pitch a second half shutout, and then they exploded at the end of the 3rd quarter and for the 4th quarter. And I mean, so many yards in that 4th quarter. We were joking about it because you were on deadline trying to get this story in, and
I
and
thought I had plenty of time, right? I
yeah,
never did that right.
everything. They just kept scoring. They kept going back and forth at the end.
It's kind of a, you see this like in a lot of different levels of football, but it was always like the cliche about the Big 12 or whatever, where these teams play really fast and score really fast, and then it just makes it harder on the defense. And I think because UTSA started to click at a higher level offensively and put together some quick scoring drives, it might have put a little bit more stress on those guys in the other end as well. But you can't, there's not a huge excuse for the amount of yards that they gave up. Maybe late in the game when you're up by 15, you're playing a little bit more of a cushion, but I don't think it was like they were in prevent the whole time, and that's why
Right.
Temple got keeps yards. I mean, I think generally they were able to do the things that they wanted to do on offense. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but there certainly is something that they need to address, and I don't know if it's as simple as tackling. I don't know if it's a scheme thing. I really am not sure at this point. It's a tough one to really put a pin in.
What did you make out of the change on the offensive line today? We saw a new left tackle, and Some guys kind of shuffle around there. I thought it seemed to work. There was only one sack and a few times Frank Harris was under pressure, and yeah, the run game was. I thought it was good enough. They might have been able to go to it a little bit more. What did you make out of that? Great.
Yeah, it's always hard to tell, especially, the first couple weeks it was pretty clear. Mekhi Hart gets injured, and so the shuffling is related to trying to figure out how to fill that gap and what
Yeah,
was best. And it was interesting this week when we asked about, I think it was because Buffalo Cruz showed up on the depth chart at guard, and it
at
was
guard.
kind of
Yeah,
weird because he was supposed to be a tackle, or at least that's how it was talked about through camp and I think through the spring as well. So the question to Jeff Traylor was, is there a chance that he plays guard, or is that just an easier position to come back at when you haven't played, or you might still be banged up a little bit? And he said they want to get the best 5 out there. And so it made me think that maybe they're starting to look at shuffles that are not necessarily health related, but just performance related,
right.
because obviously last year they might not have got great play from that position, but they just were out of guys. It was whoever
Yeah,
could stand. And I think this year, maybe as they start to get healthier, it's more about evaluating who's performing and who's not and who could do a better job in that role. And I think, Walker Beatty warmed up with the second team. It seemed like he was available, but might have just thought Venley, with the combination of the guys they have at guard with Corey Godinet and Terrell Haynes, gives them the best opportunity to block the way they needed to. And I think the talk through last year and coming into this year was that Venley is more natural at guard, and maybe it just means that they don't have the ideal setup at tackle right now, and perhaps later in the year it'll look different again. But for now, I think this is the best 5, and I imagine that'll be an evolving situation through the year. The contrast I'm trying to draw a little bit is that I don't know if it's going to be an emergency shuffle like we saw
yeah,
last year. It might be more optimizing
right.
in a more positive way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess the other point I just make on that is it seems like it's a little more complex because they're shuffling the center where last year the center was kind of the mainstay. So I think they've seen
Yeah.
Luke Lopez play pretty well in his starts. So hopefully they find something there and get some consistency because that's a hard group to keep shuffling around. I mean, 4 different guys, 4 different combinations, and 5 games isn't optimal. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the last 2 weeks there were plays where everybody but Luke started the play, and it was a
Yeah,
false start that was called
right.
on him. I know today there was another false start
Yeah,
that
I
was
think he
called on
moved the
him.
ball, they
I
said, or
don't
something.
remember
Yeah.
what happened there, but
Yeah.
I just know that I remember hearing him get called for a penalty. So I don't know if, I think there's maybe still some learning there, and maybe that's a chemistry thing, and maybe that's just him getting used to the role for the first time. But certainly there's going to be some growing pains. They probably can just hope that at the end of the year, I mean, maybe at the end of the year, they hope Ernesto's back in that role, right? I just imagine it's going to be an evolving situation where as they continue to get guys healthy, and who knows, maybe they'll take another couple of knocks there. It might be an evolving situation up there, but I
Yeah.
think the group held their own for the most part today. I mean, like you mentioned, the rushing lanes were there when they needed them for the most part, and pass protection held up. It didn't feel like Frank was running for his life, or I didn't think he took a lot of hits. Now that
Yeah.
I'm kind of, maybe I could have missed it, but generally it seemed like he was protected pretty well. So for whatever kind of challenges they're facing, that group seems to be holding its own. And
I
I think
want
that's
to
the case through the year. I mean, I
yeah.
think Jeff Traylor said the Tennessee game was the only time where they really got whipped up front, and I think that tracks with kind of what I've seen too. So, despite whatever shuffling and challenges they've faced, I think that group is doing at least up to par.
Want to talk a little bit more about the passing game. Some big performances today in the receiving game. Cephas had a good game. Takeo Kellogg had a good game. Devin McEwen, true freshman, continues to emerge as, I mean, this is only his 5th game, 4th game. And then we saw Oscar Carnes get in the mix. So the Frank Harris of old, a little bit, kind of spreading it around. That's what we saw kind of in his heyday of setting records the last 2 seasons. And I think that's going to be the recipe moving forward for this offense to continue production.
Yeah, certainly the first few weeks it seemed like Cephas was taking a lion's share of the targets and was really sort of relied on to make the offense work through the air. And he's probably still going to be the number one guy, but if anything, there hasn't been enough made about how he has stepped into that role and been as productive as he's been with the
Right.
amount of attention that defenses can put on him now because those other guys aren't there. And I think you saw in the first couple of weeks there would either be plays where, whether it was Tyke or McEwen or Amador or Carpenter or whoever, just didn't make a play on the ball, or just kind of didn't seem to be as open as consistently as some of those other top guys that UTSA has had in the past couple of years. And presumably with more opportunity, they're only going to get more comfortable and come through a little bit more like they did today. I mean, I know Chris Carpenter still had a drop, but generally speaking, those guys were a little bit more reliable and were able to make the kind of plays that UTSA is going to need them to make for this offense to be more diverse and not just reliant on Josh. And I think that's probably about how you want to see them used, right? I mean, Oscar's there for a lot of these different short yardage conversion plays, or kind of that underneath option that's available when you need the outlet. Tyke's always been sort of a potent deep threat just because of his size. There's a couple times here where it's like the touchdown was just a great throw, hitting him right in stride, but there was one where he kind of just had to go up and out muscle the guy, and that's something he's always going to be able to do if you take a shot. How often has Frank Harris said, I just kind of take a shot and those guys make me look right? And this is a case where he's a player who can do that when he's at his best, and if he has a good matchup. Generally, probably not as consistently as the guys that we've seen in the past, but he has that potential. And Devin McEwen seems like a guy who can probably be used in a lot of different places on the field and can run a lot of the different routes in the tree and can produce in a lot of different ways. So maybe he's more your Zakari and Tyke's more your JT, and then Cephas is Cephas, and you kind of replicate some of the production you had in the past.
You mentioned JT Clark. He did travel. He did warm up. He did suit up. He actually got on the field there a little bit, one of the red zone plays. But I don't know if we could expect him to be the same JT Clark as we saw before the injury without, seeing him on the field and being productive at least a little bit.
Yeah, I should have asked about it after the game and I didn't, but we'll obviously check in on Monday. It just at this point, I don't know what we're being told, how that compares with reality, just how close he really is, or if there's a possibility that he's going to be back in top form at some point, or if he is actually really far away and it's just a process that they're still going through. But I think it was against Army. The discussion was if we get in the red zone, we can throw it to him on a fade. And I think today it seemed like that was the same line of thinking because they only put him out there when they were close to the goal line. And I don't know if they really thought about going to that or if it was just something that they wanted to have out there as a decoy because they've already said in the media that they thought about throwing it to him in the red zone. But generally speaking, not having him, I felt like was a big loss. And today they didn't feel that as much because like we just talked about, the other receivers played as well as they did. So it'll be interesting to see whether him coming back has the potential to open things up even further, when that might be. I mean, we're 5 games in now, and if he's playing 1 or 2 snaps, he's pretty far away from being at the type of level that he would want to be at, or that I think a lot of us would have expected him to be at by now. And which is like, it's kind of unfair. I mean, it was a gruesome injury, one of the worst you'll ever see, and he had
11 months.
The ACL, LCL, PCL, MCL, like I think all of it. And then he said there was a hamstring thing because it was, a peripheral damage situation. So generally it's unfair to have the level of expectation we did, but you see him like how quickly he was back out there running around, and even, he put his uniform on for the spring game. I mean, he was never going to play, but like he was out there kind of stretching and getting warmed up and stuff. And so the expectation was that he'd be back a lot quicker than is reasonable. So it feels bad to act now like he's slow in his recovery. You know what I mean? Like certainly he was kind of seemed to be tracking way ahead of pace, and now maybe he's closer to what would be considered more normal. But it'll be interesting to see how bad he wants to get out there, because certainly when you think about the ability to play at the next level, he probably wants to be able to put some stuff on tape and to show what he can do. But you also don't want to put bad stuff out there. Certainly the last thing you want to do is risk something health-wise if you're not 100% and you can't play at the level you want to. So I'm not really sure if it'll just be game time decision, and then I'll look the season's over. But for the time being, I guess that's just sort of a wait and see.
Yeah, I think someone told me his NFL draft grade last year was somewhere around the 3rd round. So it is a double-edged sword with him trying to get back and, putting whatever he's going to put onto the film. And, who knows, he may be a different player another 12 months from now, or 10 months from now, or whatever it is. So, Greg, one aspect of this week I want to talk about a little. You mentioned it a little bit in your story with Frank Harris, who passed 10,000 yards passing. I guess he sees everything that everybody posts on social media, right? And that was a little bit of a talking point this week. A lot of the guys, it seemed like that they didn't want it to let them bother him, but not that it seemed like it was just a topic at some point, right?
Yeah, and still, like, we talked to the guys through the week, and even in post game, Ken Robinson, I asked him how, if how much of that he saw, and he said, "What chatter?" And it's like, okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
know you're
yeah,
not, you have no idea. But then Frank says, "I see everything," right? So,
yeah,
yeah, obviously, it's like they're not one person. Different guys are going to approach it differently, but it certainly doesn't sound like they were putting stuff up on the board and saying this is what the people are saying about you, to use it as motivation. But I think, to Jeff Traylor's point that he made again today and he made through the week, is it's just sort of inescapable because
yeah.
you get notifications now, right? Like, you just, like, you open your
It's
phone and there
everywhere.
it is. You don't have to go looking for it, it'll find you. And so the ability for Frank Harris to, he's going to say the right things about it. It's funny that it's almost surprising that he admits that he looks at it, because, a lot of people shy away from that. And he's certainly going to say it doesn't bother him. You hope for his sake and just for his own mental health that that's true. Certainly he's, able to laugh about it publicly, and
Yeah,
you don't see him engaging with these people. So it seems like he takes it the right way. I just know that can't be an easy situation. And I mean, I've been trying to think about how I'm going to say this or write this at some point, probably when we're looking back at the end of his career late in the season. But I don't know that any player at any level that I can think of has ever both inspired more doubt and more confidence, or like has both the highest combined total of like accomplishments and people questioning you. Like, and it just happens, like, we did, I think it was after the Army game. It must have been. We did our interview with Coach Trailer, and I looked at I see all the stuff too. I looked at the comments on your YouTube video, and somebody was like, "Why didn't they ask about how Eddie played better than Frank in these games?" And it's like, you really want to start a quarterback controversy about Frank Harris, but that's like what people.
yep.
That's what
That's what they're waiting for.
he has been. There hasn't been, aside from last season, there has not been a single like moment
Nope.
that somebody wasn't wondering if somebody would be better than Frank Harris at quarterback. It was always a conversation coming into the year, and you see these guys come in the last couple of weeks and play well, and it's like, well, we saw what Frank did against Houston. Like, what if these guys are better?
Yeah,
It's not that like Frank's just magic. You know what I mean? It's hard to really put into like quantifiable ways or skill sets or anything you can define of why he's so successful, but he just has all of these different intangibles, the way he leads the team, the way the guys rally around him, the way he gets them into the right calls on offense, and the way he can change things at the line. And, some of these plays, he's just kind of improvising. I mean, I'm sure it's all
yeah,
part of the concept, but when you buy a certain amount of time and just sort of some of the angles and the throws that he makes, it's just not a play that, maybe Owen McCown can drop back and throw a 15-yard out more crisply, but he can't do like so many of the different things that Frank does that make him a really special player at this stage of his career. So I don't even remember what you asked me. I just kind of went off on a tangent about Frank, but I just was so impressed with really what he's done, not just tonight, but through his career. Because I'm the same way. I'm up in the press box. Like, does Frank still have it? And then, of course, Frank still has it. He's always got it.
yeah. Interesting week for sure with all the stuff being talked about, at least on
Right. That's
social
what it
media.
was.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
yeah.
what it was.
So
So,
I enjoy all the YouTube comments for the record. So I like the criticism. I think one thing that kind of got lost is, Jeff Traylor said something this week like, you gotta like look at some of that criticism to see if anything is valid, so you could
right.
like self reflect on it a little bit, right?
No, I mean, I asked one of the
Yeah,
questions that somebody in your YouTube comments said they should ask this. I mean, it was a good idea. So,
yeah,
like, I don't think that the coaches need to be looking at people's talking points. They probably have a lot of that handled internally, and I don't know that
yeah,
it does the players any good either. But I do think if you can use it as motivation, that's powerful. And the interesting part about that is just that it's such a situation they haven't been in before.
right.
It's like, I've written this a million times this week, probably too much, but this being 1-3 is the first time they've been 2 games below 500 since like 2019. I mean,
Yeah,
even 2020, when they lost 3 games in a row, they won 3 games in a row before
yeah,
that. Like, they were never in a situation where, I guess, generally the vibes around this team were
yep,
negative. And it's fascinating with this group in particular because they're so heavy on culture and like
yeah.
the atmosphere
Leadership, yeah,
and that sort of stuff. So how does all of that play when you're not having the same level of success? And it seems like it doesn't rattle them. I think they've built up enough confidence with the success that they've sort of stored and banked through these few years that they know that they can get it done. And so generally, I'm sure everybody handles it differently in terms of seeing all the negative chatter out there. But, probably the most important part is, like, you don't see anybody clapping back at people, right? Like,
right, yeah,
they're at least mature enough about it that whatever they say or feel about it is handled internally.
yeah. Greg, the one burning question I have for you out of this game, I need the review from the Philly cheesesteak. Like, What did you order?
Oh,
Did they make fun of you? Like how was it a 5-star experience? Lay it on me.
no, so here's the thing. I know that Jeff mentioned in interviews a couple times that he got made fun of because he couldn't order a Philly cheesesteak, right? So I tried to be prepared. I mean, I Googled it, but I also listened to Jeff talk to Jason Minix this week, and Frank Harris talked to him too, and he gave I don't know if he's from the area or just to spend some time here, but he gave instructions too. So I knew to walk right up to the counter at Gino's. I was just there a couple hours ago. I went after the game, and I just said cheesesteak with onions, or no, with whiz with onions, and that's it. They're good. The cash only, which
Nice.
was I got lucky. I had a 20 on me. I don't carry cash usually, but cash only and got it done.
Cash
And
only.
yeah,
What kind of place is
I,
this?
listen, it's a street service. You get what you get, but it was delightful. I mean, I'm sure some people, it's not going to be for everybody,
Yeah.
and I thought it was going to be like fast food good, but it was like actually good, and I was
Nice.
I was a fan. So maybe it's a little dry for some people's taste. So you can put some mustard on there or something if you need to. I'm sure that's an approved way of going about things, but I loved it. I 10 out of 10.
Good deal. I'm sad to have missed it. The Roadrunners open American Conference play with a win. They are 1-0. Greg, a much needed win. UTSA plays UAB next week at home at the Alamo Dome. UAB certainly not the pushover that everybody thought they would be. I think they played pretty well last week and a surprising win today against USF. So what's next for the Roadrunners? That they got to be favored, right, this week?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't want this to sound like dismissive or whatever of all the other teams in this league, but I think UTSA is 7 to 10 points better than this whole group of like UAB, USF, Temple, Tulsa, Rice, East Carolina, North Texas. I think all those teams are kind of about the same, and UTSA is at least a level or half a level or however you want to define it above that. And so when one of them beats the other one week to week,
It's a wash.
I'm never
Yeah,
going to be that surprised
right.
about it. And unless one of them puts a huge bunch of wins together and they're sitting here 4-1 or 5-0 in a couple weeks, then maybe that kind of changes things. I mean, I think Rice is in that group too. Like, how
Yeah,
scared did Rice look in different phases? They lost to
right.
UConn today.
Yeah.
Like, I just think consistency aside and some of the things we've seen from the Roadrunners that haven't been great the first few weeks, I still think that they're just better than a lot of the teams in this league. And so if you're 7 to 10 points better than 6 teams, that doesn't mean you're going to beat 6 of them in a row because that's still really hard. But I do think that they're going to be favored in all these upcoming games still. And at least I will give you this. There were times this season where UAB looked like I forget who was it that they played like the second or third week of the season and they went down like 45
Yeah,
nothing.
terrible. Yeah.
Some like Sunbelt team or something.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, so maybe this is just like hilariously disastrous. So it's not that. We know that it's not that. But I don't know that they're, you know, going to go win the league now or anything like that. I think they probably still are a pretty flawed team in a lot of ways, having not studied them and just kind of looking at the results week to week. So generally, I do think, yeah, to your point, UTSA will probably be favored and probably, maybe not heavily by college standards, but like, in that 10-point range, I would think. So it'll be interesting to see if they can continue to, make the kind of improvements we saw over the course of this open week and shore up some of those things defensively, or if they'll end up in another shootout where it becomes a case where anything can happen. So I don't know. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I think also what one point that I would make on that is because UTSA has this kind of perception around them that they're back-to-back conference champions and they're kind of the darling coming into this league that they're going to get everybody's best shot. And I think we saw that today against Temple that Temple's going to play a little bit above what they usually do, and I think we'll see that again next week with UAB. So I mean, they're going to have a target on their back, I think, the rest of the way. And I expect them to continue to get better. I said it after the Tennessee recap that their best football is still ahead of them. Obviously, on the defensive end, they have some work to do. But even on the offensive end, I think they could be a little bit of a better running team and a little bit more crisp in some of these play calls, especially early in the game to get things going. So yeah, I still think their best football is ahead of them.
Yeah, we'll see how many best shots UAB has in the chamber. I mean, they played the number one team in the country a couple weeks ago, and then they
Yep.
played the defending conference champion at
Yep.
2. So you would think those are both games that you have to give your kind of best shot for. And then coming back this week, you've lost 4 in a row and you feel like you need to get one. So there was probably a lot riding on that one too. So I'm not saying they're going to be flat coming in against UTSA, but I think they probably had to raise their level week after week after week so far this year. And so now they just have to prove that they can do it again. And I would think with the amount of competitive games that we've seen between these two teams, I'm sure both rosters turned over pretty heavily just from year to year. Not UTSA's necessarily, but UAB, like with the coaching change, is going to have a lot of new faces. But there's going to be some people there who understand that this is a matchup that's created a lot of drama and a lot of tension years and is important to both programs. So we'll see what kind of a dynamic that adds as well.
Yep. And just one quick storyline that I'm sure we'll hit on this week. UAB quarterback Jacob Zeno is San Antonio native. So we'll see.
He played some snaps against the Roadrunners before, right?
Last year. Yeah. So, yeah. So, Greg, I think that'll wrap it up. Unless you got anything else, let you get some sleep before your flight. That'll wrap it up. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Later.